The departure board flickered above gate 34 and went dark, and that was when Shea knew Preston wasn't coming back. She'd been sitting for 11 minutes. That was the kind of thing she tracked without trying: minutes, decimal points, columns that had to reconcile. She was a bookkeeper. She balanced things. She made numbers tell the truth. Right now, the truth was this: her passport was in Preston's carry-on bag, her wallet was in Preston's jacket pocket, and Preston had gone to find a coffee 45 minutes ago. The coffee kiosks at Pearson's Terminal 3 closed at midnight. It was 2:17 in the morning. She pulled her knees up, pressing her feet against the edge of the seat. The overhead lights in this stretch of the departures hall had dimmed to an energy-saving grey. A cleaner pushed a cart past without looking up. Outside the wall of windows, rain slid down the glass in long, crooked lines. Their flight to Cancun, the trip Preston had booked for her birthday, the trip he'd said would be a fresh start, had boarded 40 minutes ago and left without them. Shea sat very still. Two men stood near the far end of the terminal. They hadn't moved in 20 minutes. They weren't checking departure screens. They weren't looking at their phones. They were just standing there, one near the pillar, one closer to the automated doors. Both wearing the specific brand of casual clothing designed to look casual and not quite pulling it off. She knew the type. Her father had kept men like that on his payroll when she was growing up in a house outside of Hamilton. Men who stood and watched and waited to be told what to move or who to stop. She knew, with a cold and absolute certainty that settled somewhere behind her breastbone, that they were watching her. She also knew that Preston had made a phone call that afternoon, right before they'd left for the airport. He'd stepped into the hallway of their apartment and kept his voice low, but not low enough. She had heard the books are clean, and she doesn't know, and had thought at the time that it was a work call. Preston worked in commercial property. She did his quarterly reconciliations. She thought she knew his accounts the way she knew her own handwriting. She had been wrong about that. She was beginning to understand just how comprehensively she'd been wrong. Shea unclenched her hands. She smoothed her jeans with her palms, a useless gesture. Something to do with her fingers so they'd stop shaking. The man by the pillar shifted his weight. He wasn't looking at her directly. He didn't have to. There was a payphone on the far wall, half hidden behind an out-of-service ATM kiosk. Nobody used payphones anymore. The sight of it was almost archaeologically strange. She'd been walking past it for 20 minutes without registering it until this exact moment, and now she stared at it the way you stared at a fire extinguisher on a wall you'd passed 100 times before the building started to burn. She walked to it. The receiver smelled of old plastic and something faintly chemical. She picked it up, fed coins from her jacket pocket, the last thing she had, the loose change she'd dropped in there this morning without thinking, and dialed a number she had not dialed in 4 years. She had not forgotten a single digit. That was the other thing about being a bookkeeper. Once a number was inside her, it stayed. It rang once. Twice. On the third ring, the line opened. No greeting. Just the sound of a room, quiet, controlled, the low ambient hum of a building that took its own silence seriously. Shea closed her eyes. Her throat was very dry. "Farrow," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. "It's Shea Aldred." A pause, 3 full seconds of it, which from a man like Farrow was practically a novel's worth of reaction. "Tell me where you are." His voice was low, and even with no surprise in it at all. She had the disorienting sense that he'd been expecting this call, not tonight specifically, but eventually, in the same way you expected certain weather. Pearson. Terminal 3. Departures. She pressed herself against the wall beside the payphone, keeping the 2 men in her sightline. "I have a problem." "I know. How many?" She understood immediately that he meant the men watching her. "2 that I can see." "Are you hurt?" "No." "Sit back down. Put your back to a wall. Don't look at them directly." "Farrow, I haven't called you in." "Sit down, Shea." She sat down. The line went quiet for a moment, and she heard something in the background of wherever he was. A brief, low exchange of words she couldn't make out, and then the soft sound of a chair. "I'm 15 minutes away," Farrow said. "Do not speak to airport security. Do not attempt to leave the building." "Why not?" "Because they're not alone. There'll be someone outside." He paused. "Your father gave you that number for a reason. I told you the same thing he did when I handed it to you. Do you remember what I said?" She remembered. She'd been 23, standing in the front hallway of Farrow's house on the Niagara Escarpment, holding a cardboard box of everything she was taking with when she left that world behind for good. He'd pressed a card into her hand. The number had been handwritten in black ink. He'd looked at her with those flat, dark eyes and said, "When it catches up to you, and it will, call this." She had hated him for saying that. She had hated the assumption. She had spent 4 years proving him wrong. "I remember," she said quietly. 15 minutes, Farrow said. "Stay on the seat." He ended the call. Shea set the receiver back onto the cradle and walked to the nearest row of seats and sat down with her spine against a concrete pillar. She watched the two men without watching them. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, and she did what she always did when things got bad. She counted the number of ceiling tiles above gate 34. The seconds between each sweep the man by the pillar made of the hall. Farrow arrived in 12 minutes. She didn't see him come through the doors. She saw the two men's posture change first. The one near the pillar straightened. The one by the automated doors turned his head, and whatever he saw made him go very still in the particular way that prey goes still when it has finally registered the thing it should have been afraid of. Then Farrow walked into her eyeline, and she felt something loosen in her chest she hadn't realized she'd been holding tight. He was not a remarkable-looking man in the obvious sense. He was tall and broad through the shoulder, wearing a dark overcoat that fit well because everything Farrow wore fit well. There was close-cropped grey at his temples that hadn't been there 4 years ago, and the scar along his jaw from a cut she'd never been told the origin of. He was 41 years old, and he moved through the terminal the way cold weather moved, without apology, and with the immediate effect of making everyone around him quietly recalibrate their available space. He was followed by a younger man, Quita, darker coat. Farrow didn't come straight to her. He went to the man by the pillar first, and Shea watched the 3-minute exchange that followed with the careful attention of someone reading the fine print on a contract they'd almost signed. Farrow kept his hands loose at his sides. He spoke in a tone she couldn't hear from where she sat. The man by the pillar went through 3 distinct physical phases: aggression, recognition, and something that looked very much like a man remembering all the reasons he valued his continued employment. The two men left. They walked out through the automated doors and didn't look back. Farrow crossed the terminal and stopped in front of her chair. He looked at her face for a moment, assessing, the way he assessed everything, without sentiment, with complete attention. "Can you walk?" he said. "I've been sitting on a plastic chair for an hour, not recovering from surgery." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "There she is," he said quietly, as though confirming something to himself. He shrugged his overcoat off and placed it over her shoulders. It was warm and heavy and smelled of cedar and cold rain. "My car is out front. Colt's bringing it around. Preston has my passport." "I know." "My wallet, my phone." "I know, Shea. He said it the way you said I know when you meant I know more than you've told me yet. We'll talk in the car." She stood up. She let him guide her with one hand at her back through the terminal, out through the sliding doors into the cold October air, where a dark SUV was already idling at the curb. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be moved through the world like something that mattered. She didn't decide how to feel about it. She just got into the car. The drive took 40 minutes. Farrow's property was north of the city, set back from a rural road outside of Aurora, behind a gate that opened with the kind of quiet efficiency that suggested it had never once malfunctioned in its life. The driveway was longer than she remembered, or maybe everything felt longer at 3 in the morning after the kind of evening she'd had. The house was modern and severe, dark stone and glass, set into the hillside like it had grown there rather than been built, making no attempt to look welcoming. It didn't need to. A doctor was already inside. He introduced himself as Dr. Quill, was clearly unbothered by the hour, and had the professional manner of someone who had long since given up asking questions he didn't need the answers to. Shea had a bruise forming along her forearm where one of Preston's bags had knocked into her when she'd tried to take it back on their way out of the apartment. She hadn't noticed it until now. There was also a small cut above her eyebrow from when she'd pulled away from him in the doorframe and caught the corner of it. She hadn't registered it as significant at the time. She'd been more focused on the sound of men coming up the apartment stairs. Dr. Quill cleaned the cut, applied butterfly closures, and wrapped her forearm with practiced efficiency. Nothing broken, ibuprofen recommended. He left with the same quiet purpose he'd arrived with. Farrow waited in the doorway the entire time. He gave her dry clothes that materialized from somewhere, dark leggings, a thick cotton sweater, wool socks. She changed in the ensuite bathroom and stood at the mirror for a moment, looking at the woman in it. She'd turned 29 3 days ago. She didn't look 29. She looked like someone who had spent a year doing someone else's dirty work, without realizing it, and had only just received the invoice. She found Farrow in the kitchen. He stood at the island with a cup of coffee, looking at his phone. He set it face down when she came in. "Sit," he said, nodding at the stool across from him. She sat. There was a second cup already poured. She wrapped both hands around it. "Tell me what you know," Farrow said. "Preston's company was using my bookkeeping business as a pass-through," she said. She'd been working it out in the car, and the numbers had confirmed what she'd started to suspect the moment she saw those 2 men in the terminal. Legitimate invoices from my business to his, inflated by margins I wrote off as operational expenses. The money moved clean. I didn't falsify anything. I just didn't know the source of the funds I was reconciling. You had no reason to. I should have looked harder. She said it flat. She didn't want reassurance on that point. The mistake was hers to own. Farrow regarded her across the island. "He's been doing it for 11 months, he said. The scheme originated with a crew out of Montreal. They used Preston as a front 3 provinces over because he was deniable and naive enough to be useful. He borrowed an additional $180,000 in operating capital from a man named Belcourt. When Belcourt's people came to collect, Preston told them the books were held in your business name." He paused. "He offered you as the guarantor." Shea was quiet for a moment. "He told them the books were in my name," she repeated. "Your business registration, your tax filings, your signature on every reconciliation." Farrow set his coffee down. "Legally, everything traces to you." "And when they came to collect tonight?" He had already called them, 2 hours before you left for the airport. Farrow's voice remained level. "The trip to Cancun was real. He intended to go. He just didn't intend to take you as a person. He intended to take you as a receipt." She worked through the arithmetic of that, the clean, cold arithmetic of what Preston had done. She had been the signature on the account. She had been the cover. She had been the variable he could trade if the equation stopped balancing. She thought about the 4 years she had spent building something that had nothing to do with her father's world. The client list she'd grown from nothing. The small office above the hardware store in Guelph that she paid for herself and opened at 7 in the morning every day because she was the only person in it. She thought about the birthday dinner 2 nights ago, the restaurant on King Street, the wine she liked, Preston saying here's to starting over, and how she'd thought he meant the 2 of them. He had meant only himself. She breathed in, she breathed out. "Where is he?" she said. "A motel off the 401 outside of Mississauga. He used a debit card at a gas station near the exit. Sloppy." A pause. "He doesn't know we found him yet." "Farrow. Don't kill him." He stopped. He looked at her. I'm not asking for him, she said quickly, because she wanted to be precise. I don't care what happens to Preston. I care what I have to carry afterward. I've spent 4 years trying to keep that weight off me. I don't want his death in my ledger. Farrow was quiet for a long moment. His expression didn't change, but she'd known him long enough. Peripherally, through her father, through the years, she'd tried to put between herself and all of this, to understand that the absence of expression was itself an expression. He used your name, Farrow said, your business. He was going to have Belcourt's people put you on a transport to Montreal to work off his debt in whatever way Belcourt decided. You understand that? She did. She understood it the way you understood a burn after it had already happened. The understanding came with a full-body flinch. She pressed down hard. I understand it, she said. I'm still asking. Farrow looked at her for another moment. Then he said, I'll see what the situation allows. From a man like Farrow, that was approximately as close to a promise as she was going to get. He left the front door, then the crunch of gravel fading into the rain. Dawn was grey and wet when she heard the SUV return. She was still at the kitchen island, hands flat on the countertop, waiting. Farrow came into the kitchen and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and she waited. He's gone from the equation, Farrow said. He's alive. He'll be south of the border before noon. He won't come back. A pause. Belcourt has been informed that the debt is cleared and that your business name is no longer connected to his operation. There'll be paperwork through the appropriate channels in the next few weeks. You'll want a lawyer. She exhaled slowly. I need to tell you the rest of it, he said. She met his eyes. Tell me. Preston didn't give Belcourt's people your business name because he panicked. He did it in September, 2 months ago, as a planned arrangement. Farrow's voice was level, factual, surgical. He had been aware of what he owed since July. He spent those 2 months filing the appropriate paperwork to make your business registration the primary liable entity. He had a verbal agreement with Belcourt that if the funds weren't recovered, they could recover them from the business owner directly. He paused. He knew what directly meant in that context. He signed off on it. The room went very still. Shea had worked in small business accounting for 6 years. She knew what signed paperwork meant. She knew the difference between a panic decision and a planned one. She knew the difference between a man who ran and a man who had been laying the groundwork to run for months. She thought about September, the weekend in Niagara-on-the-Lake, the wine on the porch of the inn, the book in Preston's lap, how relaxed he'd been, how present, how easy he'd been to believe. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs. Okay, she said. Farrow waited. Okay, she said it again, not to him, to herself, to the specific version of herself that had spent 4 years insisting the careful life, the invisible life, the life scrubbed clean of everything she'd grown up surrounded by, was actually possible. That version needed to hear it plainly. She had been wrong, not because she had done something wrong, because the world had simply walked past the careful line she'd drawn and done what it liked. Her father had told her something once, when she was about 15 and furious at him for what he was. He'd said, "The difference between my world and yours isn't the danger, Shea. The danger is everywhere. The difference is whether the people around you are honest about it." She had hated him for saying it. She was starting to think she owed some debts to the dead. "What happens now?" she said. "Belcourt will respect the arrangement. He's practical." Farrow leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "But he'll want something. He lost face on this. His people came into my city, went after a woman I've claimed, and walked away with nothing. That's a conversation we'll be having." "An expensive one," she said. "Yes." He looked at her directly. "I'm telling you that plainly because you're going to ask anyway, and I don't have the patience for evasion." She almost laughed. It came out as something smaller, a short breath that was at least honest. "My father used to say you were the most straightforward, dangerous man he'd ever met." "Your father wasn't wrong about everything." "No," she agreed, "just about how much of it I'd eventually need." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had arrived, from different directions and at considerable personal cost, at the same set of facts. She looked at the window. Flat grey light washed the hillside. She thought about her office above the hardware store in Guelph. She thought about her sharply maintained spreadsheets, the filing cabinet she kept locked because she took her clients' numbers seriously. She thought about 11 months of invoices, and every place Preston's numbers didn't quite add up if you looked at them the right way. She should have looked the right way. She hadn't. That was done now. "I want to see the accounts," she said. Farrow looked at her. "Belcourt's operation. Whatever you have, I want to see how they moved it. If my name is on it, I want to know what my name is on. And if there are other businesses they used the same way, I'll find them. That's what I do, Farrow. I find where the numbers don't tell the truth." He was quiet for a moment. "That," he said slowly, "is not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" He looked at her for a long time. The scar along his jaw caught the grey light. She noticed, now that she was looking properly, that he looked tired, not in the way of a man who hadn't slept, but in the way of a man who had been carrying a specific weight for a specific number of years and had stopped waiting for it to lift. "I expected you to ask me to take you to a hotel," he said, "or a train station." "Would you have?" "No," he said it simply. "I would have told you what I'm telling you now. You called this number. Your name is in Belcourt's books, whether either of us wants that or not. If you walk out of here, that's the context you're walking into." He paused. "But I'd have taken you anyway, to a hotel, if that's what you wanted." She thought about that. "Why did you answer?" she said. 4 years I never called. I told you I wasn't going to." He looked at the window. "Because you said you weren't going to," he said, "which meant you were the kind of person who only would if there was no other choice. I decided that was worth answering." The room held that for a moment. "Farrow," she said. If I help you find what Belcourt moved through my books, that puts me inside this." "Yes." "I need you to understand I'm not doing it to belong to anything. I'm doing it because those are my numbers, my name, my work." Her voice was steady. "No one gets to use my work to hide dirty money and walk away from it clean." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not much, not in any way she could easily name, but it shifted. "I understand," he said. His phone buzzed. He read something and stood. "Belcourt is making noise," he said. "I need to handle it." He looked at her. "Can you manage here for a few hours?" "I've been all right in considerably worse circumstances." "I know you have," he said it quietly. With a weight behind it, she didn't have the energy to unpack right now. He moved toward the hall, stopped. "Shea." She looked up. "Your father told me once," Farrow said, not turning around, "that the only thing he regretted about his life was that you'd had to leave it to be safe, that he'd never managed to make it somewhere you could stay." He paused. "He was wrong about a lot of things. He wasn't wrong about that." He walked out, the front door, the gravel. She sat alone in the quiet house on the hill, and outside the grey October light was beginning, reluctantly, to let in the day. She thought about her father, about a house outside of Hamilton, and a man who had kept dangerous men on his payroll, and still managed, somehow, to make her feel like the safest person in any room she shared with him. She thought about 4 years of dismantling every wall he'd built around her, and insisting she could build her own from scratch, better, cleaner, from different materials entirely. She thought about an invoice she'd filed in August. $42,000, strategic consulting services, clean, correct, completely unaware of what it was covering. She got up. She found a legal pad in a kitchen drawer and a pen, and she sat back down at the island, and she started writing. Every invoice, every date, every description that had seemed at the time entirely ordinary. She was going to find every number Preston had touched. By the time Farrow came back, she had filled 4 pages. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the legal pad. He looked at her. "The call with Belcourt," he said, coming in and setting his keys on the counter. "He's claiming reparations. He says he's owed for operational disruption, regardless of whose fraud it was. He wants the accountant, he paused. Same arrangement Preston agreed to. And you said? I told him the only person in this country with any claim on your name is me, and that he should spend his evening thinking carefully about whether he wants to be on the wrong side of that. Farrow sat down across from her. His eyes went to the legal pad. He has partners in Toronto who owe him favors. It'll escalate. Good, she said. He looked up. Page 3, she said, sliding the pad toward him. There are 3 companies beyond Preston's that used the same billing code sequence. That's not coincidence. Whoever designed this was consistent enough to leave a pattern. If we pull the CRA filings for those companies going back 2 years, we'll have enough to show that the paper trail leads directly back to Belcourt's operation. She tapped the page. That's leverage. Real leverage. The kind that doesn't need a gun behind it. Farrow looked at the page for a long moment. You did all of this, he said slowly, in 4 hours. This is what I do. He looked at her. Something in his expression, that carefully maintained flatness he wore like a second coat, shifted again, and this time she recognized it. Her father had worn the same look, occasionally, in moments he hadn't meant for her to see. She recognized it now for what it was, the face of someone who had spent a very long time carrying something alone and had just been handed, unexpectedly, a second set of hands. He picked up the legal pad. Belcourt wants a war over numbers, Farrow said half to himself, turning to the first page. Then he picked the wrong woman's books to hide in, Shea said. Farrow set the pad down. He looked at her across the kitchen island, the bruise on her forearm, the butterfly closure above her eyebrow, the pen still in her hand, and something in the set of his jaw eased, fractionally, in the way that stone eases, barely visible, entirely real. Show me, he said. And she did.